They were not just a team, they were a force of nature, a perfect storm of talent, ego, and innovation that didn't just defeat opponents, but dismantled their very will to compete. For half a decade, the Golden State Warriors were basketball's inevitable conclusion, a dynasty forged in the fires of a revolutionary style of play that rendered the old guard obsolete. They were the architects of joy, a team that played with a mesmerizing, almost arrogant fluency, stacking wins and championships as if collecting trophies was their divine right. Their rise was so meteoric, their dominance so absolute, that the basketball world had accepted a simple, unchangeable truth. The future belonged to them. And then, in the span of a single brutal minute, the entire edifice cracked. It was not a slow decline, but a sudden, catastrophic collapse that unfolded before a global audience, leaving behind not just a lost championship, but a haunting question that would define their legacy for years to come. How does something so powerful, so seemingly invincible, simply break? The fall of the Warriors dynasty is not a story of an enemy conquering a kingdom from the outside. It is the story of a kingdom crumbling under the weight of its own greatness. A tale of how the very attributes that built an empire, the relentless drive, the risk-taking, the super team assemblage, contained the seeds of its own spectacular destruction. This is the legend of the Warriors' reign, and the letdown of a curse they never saw coming. Before the parades, before the rings, there was a simple, radical idea. The three-point shot wasn't just a weapon. It was the weapon. Under the visionary ownership of Joe Lacob and the strategic mind of coach Steve Kerr, the Warriors didn't just embrace this new math, they weaponized it with a religious fervor. They assembled a core that was not just talented, but symbiotic, their skills interlocking with a precision that felt like destiny. There was Stephen Curry, the slight-framed magician who changed the geometry of the court itself, shooting from distances that were previously considered a laughable gamble. His mere presence 30 feet from the basket was a threat that stretched defenses to their breaking point. Alongside him was Klay Thompson, the perfect stoic complement, a shooter of such pure and unthinking mechanics that he could detonate for 30 points in a single quarter without dribbling the ball more than twice. And then there was Draymond Green, the engine and the ID, a defensive savant whose basketball IQ and ferocious intensity fueled the team's soul. This big three was the foundation, but the dynasty was truly born with a strategic masterstroke that was as controversial as it was brilliant: the recruitment of Kevin Durant. In the summer of 2016, still stinging from a gut-wrenching NBA Finals loss to LeBron James and the Cleveland Cavaliers, after a historic 73-win season, the Warriors made a move that felt less like a transaction and more like a cheat code. Adding Durant, a 7-foot scoring machine of unparalleled efficiency, was an act of competitive violence against the rest of the league. The narrative shifted instantly. They were no longer the plucky, homegrown revolutionaries. They were the Death Star, a monolithic superpower assembled to annihilate all competition. The league let out a collective groan. The question was no longer who would win, but for how long. They had achieved a state of basketball nirvana, but in doing so, they had painted a massive target on their backs and placed their entire legacy on a single unforgiving premise: perpetual, perfect health. The Durant-era Warriors did not just win, they demoralized. Their games often felt like foregone conclusions by the end of the first quarter. They would play with their food, lulling teams into a false sense of security before unleashing a blitz of three-pointers and defensive stops, a Golden State run. that would turn a close game into a 20-point blowout in the time it took to get a drink from the fridge. They won back-to-back championships in 2017 and 2018, sweeping their way through the Western Conference playoffs with a casual brutality. They were the Avengers of the NBA, and the league was full of overmatched henchmen. This period fostered an aura of invincibility, both within the organization and in the public perception. They played with a swagger that walked the fine line between confident and entitled. They talked of chasing ghosts, of measuring themselves against the greatest teams of all time. The regular season became a prolonged tune-up, a 82-game prelude to the inevitable coronation in June. The machine was so well-oiled, so dominant, that it seemed impossible to imagine it failing. They had the best shooters, the most versatile defender, one of the greatest scorers in history, and a deep bench of savvy veterans chasing rings. But beneath the gleaming surface, the stresses were mounting. The constant pressure to be perfect, the relentless media scrutiny, and the subtle, unspoken tensions within the locker room began to form hairline fractures. Draymond Green's fiery passion, once the team's catalyst, now occasionally boiled over, most famously in a sideline confrontation with Kevin Durant that spilled into the public eye, questioning the very fabric of their brotherhood. The narrative of a light-years-ahead franchise was cracking under the human weight of ego and expectation. They were still winning, but the joy was becoming a job. The machine was starting to make a strange noise, a faint grinding that everyone chose to ignore, because the output was still championship level. They were soaring so high that they forgot the fundamental law of gravity. What goes up must eventually come down. The 2019 NBA Finals against the Toronto Raptors was supposed to be the victory lap, the three-peat that would cement their status as the greatest dynasty of the modern era. Instead, it became a horrifying slow-motion car crash. The first domino fell when Kevin Durant, who had been sidelined with a calf strain, rushed back for a do-or-die Game 5. The entire basketball world held its breath. His return was meant to be the cavalry charge, the moment the superhero returned to save the day. Midway through the second quarter, he drove past Raptors guard Serge Ibaka, planted his right foot, and then fell. There was no contact. He simply crumpled, grabbing his Achilles tendon. The silence in the arena was deafening. Teammates and opponents alike looked on in horror. The unshakable invincibility of the Warriors shattered in that single, silent moment. As Durant was helped off the court, the burden of the dynasty fell onto the shoulders of the remaining stars. And for a moment, they carried it. They won that game, fueled by a mixture of adrenaline and grief, forcing the series back to Oakland. But the basketball gods were not finished. In Game 6, with the Warriors fighting for their lives, Klay Thompson, the Iron Man who had never missed a playoff game, drove to the basket for a dunk. He was fouled hard and landed awkwardly, his left knee buckling in a way that knees are not meant to bend. He had to be helped to the locker room, but in a moment of pure, tragic drama, he jogged back out to shoot his free throws before finally succumbing to the pain. It was the last time he would step on an NBA court for over 900 days. The diagnosis? A torn ACL. In less than a week, the two most potent scoring weapons of the most potent offensive machine in history had been felled by catastrophic, non-contact injuries. The house of cards, built on a foundation of transcendent talent and razor-thin margins, had not just been knocked over. It had been vaporized. The Raptors won the championship on the Warriors' home floor, but the real story wasn't the triumph of a new champion. It was the stunning, brutal, and definitive end of an era. The dynasty didn't just lose, it was physically broken, its core dismantled by its own relentless pursuit of one more title. In the aftermath, the search for a why began. Was it simply bad luck? A cruel twist of fate? Or was it something more systemic? A direct consequence of the path they had chosen? The evidence points overwhelmingly to the latter. The curse of greatness was not a supernatural hex, but a predictable outcome of physical and strategic overextension. The first factor was the immense physical toll of 5 consecutive deep playoff runs. While the rest of the NBA's stars enjoyed their summers, the Warriors' core players were logging hundreds of extra high-pressure minutes, year after year. Their bodies were not given the necessary time to recover and rejuvenate. The cumulative fatigue weakens muscles, tightens tendons, and turns minor tweaks into major injuries. They were a high-performance sports car that had been driven at 200 miles per hour for 5 years straight without a full engine rebuild. The wear and tear was inevitable. The only question was, which part would fail first? The second, and more damning factor, was the chase for the three-peat. The psychological and physical pressure of winning a third consecutive title is historically immense. It creates a unique kind of stress, a desperate all-or-nothing mentality that can lead to catastrophic shortcuts. The pressure on Kevin Durant to return from his calf strain, both from within the organization and from the external narrative, was immense. Pushing a player back from one injury directly led to a far more devastating one. It was a gamble, a roll of the dice with a superstar's health, and they lost. The very culture of next man up and relentless pursuit of greatness created an environment where risk was not just accepted, but expected. Finally, the superteam model itself proved to be a fragile construct. By concentrating so much elite talent on one roster, the Warriors had created a system with zero margin for error. Their entire ecosystem was built around the unique skills of Curry, Thompson, Durant, and Green. There was no backup plan for the simultaneous loss of 2 of them. The regular season had been devalued to such an extent that the role players were not battle-tested for the intensity of the final stage. The dynasty was so top-heavy that when the peaks were sheared off by injury, there was nothing left to hold up the structure. Their greatest strength, their concentrated, unparalleled star power, became their single greatest point of failure. The legacy of the Warriors dynasty is one of breathtaking duality. They are remembered for their revolutionary style, their iconic moments, and their 4 championships. Stephen Curry is rightly celebrated as the player who changed the game forever. But their story is also a permanent cautionary tale. They are the what-if team of the 21st century. What if Kevin Durant never tears his Achilles? What if Klay Thompson never tears his ACL? Would they have won 5, 6, or even 7 championships? The potential for near-total dominion over the NBA for a decade was very real. Instead, their reign ended not with a graceful sunset, but in a field of hospital beds and what could have beens. The subsequent years were a shadow of what once was. Durant left for Brooklyn. Thompson spent 2 years in a grueling rehabilitation. Curry, for a time, was a lone king in an empty castle. They would eventually rise again, winning another title in 2022, a testament to the resilience of their core and a beautiful storybook chapter for Curry, Thompson, and Green. But it was a different kind of victory, one of perseverance and reclamation, not the effortless dominance of their peak. The ultimate resolution is that the Warriors' story is the ultimate embodiment of the legends and letdowns theme. Their legend was built on pushing the boundaries of what was possible in basketball, on assembling a team so great it felt like it was from a video game. Their letdown was that the human body has limits that even greatness cannot override. The curse was not in their failure, but in their proximity to perfection. They flew too close to the sun, and the fall, when it came, was as spectacular as the flight itself. They will be remembered as one of the greatest teams ever assembled, but their history will forever be tinged with the ghost of an even greater unfulfilled destiny. A stark reminder that in sports as in life, the pursuit of immortality can sometimes cost you everything.